If you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. If you do read them, you are misinformed. That is Samuel Clemens, otherwise known as Mark Twain, and this is AllMinucOne. So, folks, this week we are talking about personality and the proclivities of personality towards your political disposition. Why you think the way you think, and why you vote the way you vote, and why you align the way you align. Now, before we get into it, if you like this kind of content, please hit that like button, share, or subscribe. Help me grow, help me get the word out. Maybe you aren't exposed to these ideas or your friends aren't. And, help me grow my channel. So with that, let's get started. Now, I spoke about this to some degree yesterday, but I really wanted to cover this. And we're pretty much going to stick with this whole article today. Hopefully, I will get this done rather quickly instead of being as long-winded as I normally am. But this is from Tablet. This was written in 2019. And it says, America's white saviors, white liberals, are leading a woke revolution that is transforming American politics and making Democrats increasingly uneasy with Jewish political power. This is interesting. Now, this is written by Zach Goldberg, and he is a PhD candidate, if I'm not mistaken. He may have it by now. So let's get into the meat of the article here. A sea change has taken place in American political life. The force driving this change is the digital era style of moral politics known as wokeness, a phenomenon that has become pervasive in recent years and yet remains elusive as experts struggle to give it a clear definition and accurately measure its impact. Give me 1 second here. It's a lot easier for me to read when it's in dark mode. Where it did come from, what do its adherents believe? It is just something happening inside the Twitter bubble and on college campuses, or is it really spreading across the social and cultural landscape and transforming the country as sometimes appears to be the case in reality? Wokeness, a term that originated in Black popular culture, is a broad euphemism for a more narrow phenomenon, the rapidly changing political ideology of white liberals that is remaking American politics. Now, as he talks about this, let's go through this for a second real quick. He's saying, is this a bubble? Yes, it's absolutely a bubble. Currently, though, after COVID and the George Floyd incident and then the riots that followed, a lot of people are jumping on the wokeness, thinking that somehow they are allies. And I've explained this before in previous videos. I made a BLM video specifically about their roots and how this communist movement, this neo-Marxist postmodernist movement, has been growing in America for a very long time. Now, the Soviet Union is gone, and they have less communistic rule now, although there's some remains. But it was the things that they set up beforehand that has subverted the culture. And we have allowed it to subvert our culture for quite a very long time. And in fact, on top of that, we have a whole political system that actually likes this kind of rule to some degree, perhaps a little bit more on the fascist side of that socialist utopia, where they get a top-down control of the governmental entities. So let's read some more. Over the decade, the baseline attitudes expressed by white liberals on radical and social justice questions have become radically more liberal. Now, I don't agree with that. The word liberal has been misused for over 100 years. That should say leftist, radically more leftist, or it should say libertine. In one especially telling example of the broader trend, white liberals recently became the only demographic group in America to display a pro-out group bias, meaning that among all the different groups surveyed, white liberals were the only one that expressed a preference for other racial and ethnic communities above their own. Now, I covered this briefly yesterday at the end of my video. This particular article is where that came from, And there is a ton of research here. As woke ideology has accelerated, a growth factor of white liberals have pulled away from the average opinions held by the rest of the coalition of Democratic voters, including minority groups in the party. The revolution and moral sentiment among this one segment of American voters has led to a cascade of consequences ranging from changes in the norms and attitudes expressed in the media and popular culture to the adaptation of new political rhetoric and electoral strategies of the Democratic Party. Nor has this occurred in a vacuum on the left, as the initiative set in motion by white liberals in turn provoked responses and countermeasures from conservatives and Republicans. And he goes on to talk about a Vox article and the Great Awokeness. Now, I'm going to, for the sake of time, jump down a little bit here and show you some of these poll results. And let's actually get back to this article real quick and just cover what he just said here, and some things that I have some disagreements with. One, this is not something that has not been in on the left for very long. This has been on the left since at least the 1960s, but prior to that, and as I covered yesterday, a lot of this comes out of the desire to quell the idea of ethnic differences, of minority differences, of gender differences, of sexual differences, whatever those differences may be, of just pure genetic differentiation to somehow defeat an evil that was defeated back in the 1940s, and that would be Nazi Germany. Now, what I talked about yesterday was the idea of bias and stereotypes, and that bias and stereotypes exist all throughout humanity, and we use them, and they're a useful tool, and there's a reason why we use them, and it doesn't make you a bigot because you have certain stereotypes of people. In fact, stereotypes are the most repeatable, or one of the most repeatable effects among social psychology and social sciences. So, let's go here. It says results among whites, percent very extreme often. So this is, the blue is when you see someone being taken advantage of due to their race or ethnicity, how often do you feel protective toward them? And then the red is how often would you say that you have a tender, concerned feeling for people from other racial or ethnic groups who are less fortunate than you? And the green says, how often would you say you try to better understand people of other racial or ethnic groups by imagining how things look from their perspective? And then the last one, the orange here, says, before criticizing someone from another racial or ethnic group, how often do you try to imagine how you would feel if you were in their place? So the liberals, the very, very liberal or the very leftist, are a very high percentage, 84 in the first group, 74, 79, 81. The liberals, the plain liberals, whatever they want to call them, that is 70, 51, 57, and 64 respectively. And then when you get down to moderates, it decreases dramatically. And then with conservatives, it's about the same. It's about the same across the board from moderate to conservative. This next chart is the mean in-group bias by race and ethnicity. Now, I went over an academic paper in brief. I didn't really cover much of it. I just looked at a little bit of the abstract, but I did that so that you all could educate yourselves because, again, I'm not here to be your daddy. I'm not here to feed you. I am here to teach you how to fish. I want a strong society, and a strong society is a society that they can think and be individual and can research and can look at their own and does not have to rely on the experts to tell them what to think. And by all means, the experts in many fields are utterly corrupt. It doesn't mean that there aren't good experts out there. There are, but you can tell what a principled moral person is when you see how they interact with the world and how they present information, if they correct themselves and if they tell you what their bias is. Like I will always tell you, I am an independent. I am a classical liberal. That means that I believe in free market economics, small government. I believe in federalism within the United States scope. I believe in the states' rights to rule under the 10th Amendment. I believe the people's right to rule under the 9th Amendment, something we never talk about. And I believe in the Constitution, things that we as a society completely ignore today. So, mean group and bias. So here it shows blacks, and that is at 15.58. Now this is out of a 0 to 20 scale. That's 20 to negative 20. Hispanics is 12.83. So this is understandable. And there are lots of obviously different ethnic groups among Hispanics. There are as well amongst blacks, but they identify them less often, having the majority of the population have been brought over centuries ago because of slavery. But if you have any Hispanic friends, if you know anybody from Latin American nations, they tend to congregate together despite their differences. And same with Asian groups to some degree, but of course there's a lot more hatred between certain Asian groups like Korean and Japanese, for instance. But they, again, have a in-group preference, 13.94. But here, white liberals, or as I would correct it, leftists, are at a negative 13.17. And that's crazy. And then non-liberal whites at 11.62. So pretty much even with most of the other groups. Obviously, for probably historical reasons and cultural reasons, the black community identifies with their in-group a lot better. And that's understandable. But this is quite strange right here. This white liberal anti-in-group bias. They actually feel more towards other groups. And that's what this article is about and how it is manipulating politics. So it says, remarkably, white liberals were the only subgroup exhibiting a pro-out-group bias, meaning white liberals were more favorable towards non-whites and are the only group to show this preference for group other than their own. Indeed, an average white liberal rated ethnic and racial minority groups 13 points or half a standard deviation warmer than whites. And half a standard deviation is pretty big. As is depicted in the graph below, this displays this disparity in feelings of warmth toward in-group versus out-group is even more pronounced among whites who consider themselves very liberal, where it widens to just 20 points. Notably, while white liberals have consistently evinced weaker pro-in-group bias than conservatives across time, the emergence and growth of the pro-out-group bias is actually a very recent and unprecedented phenomenon. So I read a little bit of that yesterday. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit bigger. So again, very liberal at 19.45. This is crazy, guys. Like, these are literally people like Robin DiAngelo who hate themselves because she claims specifically that she is a racist. And, there's been a meme of sorts on the right. There's been a meme for a very long time of the soft bigotry of low expectations. And this idea is that the left is actually racist. And by the way, the history of the Democratic Party is absolutely, undoubtedly full of things like segregation, which they're going back to, race hatred, which they've always had. It's either been toward blacks or now it's being shifted back towards whites, or just believing that these groups of people, instead of treating them as human beings, are incapable and they have to infantilize certain peoples. So, to some degree, this happened with the Jewish community in that we had to protect Jews from all anti-Semitism, as if they couldn't do this on their own, because, again, of Nazi Germany, something that basically was completely eradicated. And that's where a lot of this stems from. The other part of it stems from communism. And communism is a brilliant, brilliant tactician when it comes to divide and conquer. And of course, there are many forms of Marxism, communism. There's Leninism, Stalinism, Trotskyism, which was essentially communism that didn't want to expand around the world. But I mean, Trotsky, got it in the end, like most of the useful idiots. So later on, we had the Frankfurt School, and then the postmodernist with guys like Foucault and Derrida, and they're all just a bunch of Marxists, and that's all third wave intersectional feminism is. That's all of this stuff that's going around with blacks being oppressed and whatever else. And the reality is that most of the problems within the black community come down to what's going on in the black community and not outside forces, except for the government wanting to be their daddy. And there are many people that point to this, notably people like Thomas Sowell, who is a bona fide genius and scholar. And if you don't know Thomas Sowell, you should look up his stuff. And he points to this. Larry Elder, who is a personality on the right, who's a lawyer, but a radio show host, that points to the fatherless homes as being the collapse of the black community and families. And obviously there's poverty in other things, but even the Brookings Institute pointed to the three primary things that you had to do to basically not be in poverty. That you had, I forget what the percentage is, but you had like a less than a 5% chance of being in poverty if you essentially graduated high school, got a job and stuck with it, and waited to get married before you had a kid. And the Brookings Institute is very left. So anyways, back to what is here. So about half of the very liberals biased is what the liberal bias is, or the left-wing bias, at negative 8.56%. So these are, maybe allies, people who aren't like Robin DiAngelo saying, she's a racist and so are you because of the color of your skin. All this stuff's just about power and manipulation, by the way, people. But see, moderates have a normal, healthy in-group preference, and so do conservatives. Very conservatives have about the same as the majority of the black community, at least per these surveys. Not surprisingly, data from the American National Election Studies show white liberals scoring significantly higher on measures of white privilege awareness. How much does being white grant you unearned privilege in today's society and white guilt? Real quick, just an anecdote here. I remember taking a little quiz on BuzzFeed about, your privilege and whatever, which BuzzFeed's garbage, but I thought it would be funny because it was going around a few years back. And I absolutely answered it honestly. And of course, I was very underprivileged according to them. And it had questions like, have you ever felt, were you ever the only race in the room? And it's like, yeah. Did you start off with money in your life? And I was like, no. Like I've worked all my life. What are you talking about? I've been a blue collar guy my entire life. I forget all the other things. Like, have you ever, walked down the street and felt like you were in danger, or been in a neighborhood where you felt unwelcome? Like, yeah, absolutely. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not a white privilege thing. That's just a thing. Of course, I've been in a lot of dangerous jobs in my life too. So in dangerous places, but still, even here in America, like, anyways, I just think it's funny how they manipulate people's emotions to do otherwise. I saw a thing a while back where on Instagram or something where a man and his wife were going through, and the man was black and the woman was white, and he was like, yeah, I've encountered this, yeah, I've encountered that. And a lot of people were, saying otherwise. We're saying this is stupid, blah, blah, blah. And they're right, it is stupid because the woman didn't feel or see it that way, and the man felt that way. And that's fine that they wanted to feel that way, but your feelings, I'm sorry to tell you people, but your feelings are not an objective measure of life in the world. I know a lot of people that are jerks because they run off of their feelings all the time. and they never hold themselves back. They never temper their own spirit. They never develop themselves, right? And so, I talk about the body, the soul, and the spirit. And if you never really get in touch with your soul, your real personality, and you never temper your spirit, your attitude, and what you project into the world, you're probably going to think a lot of negative things. You're probably going to have a very poor outlook on the world. And I can guarantee you the people that are the most optimistic and the hardest working are the most successful in life. And that is just based off of the data. It's not the people that are curmudgeons and grumbling about everything and constantly mad and pissy with people. It just doesn't happen. But anyways, let's get back to this article here. It says both of these variables are strongly correlated with measures of liberal racial sympathy, or what is more traditionally referred to as low racial resentment. The white liberal, which is interesting because, again, the left is the Jim Crow party. They largely were against not just integration, but the civil rights movement. The only people on the right that were against the civil rights movement were essentially people who were saying it wasn't constitutional for the federal government to do that the state should do it, and it would happen over time. And actually, that is the correct argument. That is the correct argument, whether you think it's a good thing or not. But see, that's anti-progressivism. And so you had people on the right, or Republicans, that thought it was a matter of constitutionality, that the federal government had no right to intervene with the states. And that is absolutely true if you hold an originalist perspective. But see, progressives don't care about that, which is why to them the Constitution is meaningless. That also proves that there are progressives on the right, by the way. When I say that the neocons, they weren't quite around then, but the reality is that there are and there have been progressives on the right. They're just mostly all on the left. So it says the white liberal scores on which reached the ANES high in 2016. Previous research has shown that these collective moral emotions triggered by historical wrongdoings and perceptions that an in-group's advantage and privileges are illegitimate can increase support for reparative and humanitarian social policies. That is exactly what has happened in recent years as white liberals have become increasingly supportive of affirmative action, reparations, and increased immigration. And this is all silly. Affirmative action is a racist policy. It again is soft bigotry of low expectations, and we can have a debate about that. But every debate we have about that is just going to be that these people aren't as smart, they don't have as much opportunity, and whatever else. And you're all basing that off their race and not their character. We could, if we got the race out of it and we wanted to look at people who were just poor in disproportionate areas, I might be behind that. I could potentially be behind that. But you want to make it racial, and that's where I have a problem. Reparations, that's a hard one to prove and whatever. Like, that's a very deep dive. Maybe I'll do something on that someday. Increased immigration. Well, I hate to tell you folks, but illegal immigration just makes people poorer all around. It does not help people. It actually brings our society down to a lower common denominator. I'm kind of agnostic against the wall, but I am not against controlling immigration. Immigration needs to be controlled. It needs to be controlled because we cannot just have random people in. And it also does allow, and this is not a bigoted statement, but it does allow criminals to be here. We know this. It's a fact. So if you're on the left and you're going to say, well, he's a racist or he's a bigot, well, whatever. I don't care what you think, because you don't think. You're just projecting your own dark, racist soul onto me. I don't mean anything like that. So, social media accelerant. For most of human history, the primary trigger for moral emotions like outrage come from local acts of wrongdoing. After all, if you have no idea what events are going on outside your village and hardly any sense of the world at large, it's hard to be outraged by them. In the modern era, however, this is rapidly becoming less true, along with drastic improvements in material well-being, which some argue has enabled individuals to whose immediate needs are met to shift their concerns to welfare of people they've never met. Modern technology has widened our exposure to injustice against strangers. So I'm not going to go on with this. I want to show you some numbers. But I do want to say this about the social media accelerant. Obviously, you can reach out and you can touch and talk to more people, and we are more isolated as technology grows and as we are clustered in bigger and bigger cities. Now, that is changing slightly now as riots and the draconian restrictions for this very, very survivable virus has come into place. Restrictions, by the way, and fear-mongering meant to control your mind. Like, I say that with such emphasis because that is what it is doing. And that is what it is meant to do. And that is not what a free society is about. And that's not what a good government does. A government that has your best interest in mind does not try to control you. Have you ever met a person who has a controlling parent and ever thought that that parent had the best interest of that child in mind, or adult, or whatever? There is no dignity in not allowing people freedom. When you are controlled, when you are a slave of any system, you have lost your dignity. It has been taken away from you. And there are some points of dignity that you can still keep, as in you can be free in your mind. Alexander Solzhenitsyn talked about this, not participating in the lie. And I will not participate in this freaking lie. This is ridiculous. And you out there listening, you need to stand up and you need to speak up. And maybe you live in an area where everyone agrees with you, and that's great. But you need to try to do better and speak out and let people know that there are people who are like-minded. And that's one of the good things about social media. Social media, though, can be a cancer on your mind. It can be addictive. It can be all kinds of other things. So it must be handled responsibly, like any other technology. Much like I would say that firearms, being a technology that have great benefit to human life for many reasons, have to be handled responsibly. Technology cannot be handled willy-nilly. Anyways, so to this, it says, mean Google search interest, 0 to 100 by year. So this goes from 2005 to 2020. And actually, this was 2019 when it was written, so these aren't quite right. But these are, I believe, it doesn't show here. Maybe it gets into it. But I believe these were, it says Google search. So I believe this was taken straight from Google's data. So we see white privilege down here was very low, and all of a sudden it begins to spike. And I talked about this before because I've been following this since about 2012 or so when it began to rise. And we can see that there is a rise here. Racism, very low. And in fact, in my opinion, being the age that I am, I saw essentially, in general, racism disappear. And now the left has made racism a thing again. And so it starts to rise and rise and rise. And partially it's flatline, but I'm sure if we looked at today, it would be spiked up here because of the media hyping things up and getting people stirred up and involved. And by the way, they do this on purpose so that when there is civil unrest like this, they can call the government to power. Like this is historically what happens. All right, they can call the government to power, and the government can take more power, and they're in bed with them. And it is what it is. They hate our current president because he doesn't go along with all this. He doesn't go along with all this manipulation. You can say whatever about, who he is or his personality, but I do believe the man is a patriot and he's an anti-globalist. And that's pretty good enough for me right now at this point. Social justice was up a little bit, went down, back up. People of color. I hate this word. What is the difference between this and calling them colored people? People of color. Like, Do you not understand like how racially charged this is? It's one thing to say I'm white and you're black or brown or whatever, but normally I would just say, hey, hey Charles, hey, hey Mike, hey whatever your name is. Does everything have to be about this outward exterior, or can we get to the deeper individual? Probably not, because you haven't developed your deeper individual. And again, I will emphasize this. This is what is going on with these people that believe these crazy ideas. They haven't developed their deeper individual. They're all persona. So all they can see is the persona of everyone else. And that persona has to do with the amount of melanin in your skin. It has nothing to do with your interest, has nothing to do with your actual life or background. In fact, they would pigeon you whole into a certain lifestyle. And, it's just very, very depraved thinking and a ton of projection. So we can see again here, racial equality goes up, went down a little bit. That's probably spiked again. Institutional racism, huge spike here in 2015, 2016. That's, if there is institutional racism, it is on the left. I spoke of this yesterday. Why do I say that? Well, the left owns academia. The left owns Hollywood. They own the legacy news media. They own all the newspapers. They own the largest, most powerful party in the entire world. The Democratic Party is the largest party. There are more voters in the Democratic Party than there are of any other party in the United States, or probably in the entire world. And they own them. So when people talk about institutional racism, what are you talking about? We talk about the cities. We look at Baltimore. Baltimore is like 60% black population. Everybody on their council practically and within their police force are black. There are very few white people. Their mayor's black. Baltimore is run by Democrats. And you're going to sit there and say that these Democrats who are black themselves are creating this institutional racism? Well, then they turn that around and say, well, it's systemic. You don't even know it. It's bias. It's bias that you don't even know. You're not even aware about. It's subconscious. No. You have subconscious bias because you haven't developed your shadow. You haven't developed your ego, nor your shadow, nor your anima, nor your animus. And so you have that, and you want to project all of that crap onto me. And I'm sorry, but no, it does not exist within me. And you can go take a hike if you think otherwise. Oppression, hiked up. Marginalized groups. Again, a little drop here, but still, power structures. That's kind of good to see that isn't as much of a rise. But let's get back to the article. It says the graph above shows the percentage of white liberals and conservatives perceiving discrimination against blacks to be very serious problems, although data was unavailable for the intervening years. The percentage of white liberals giving the very serious response was largely the same in 2010, 25%, as it was in 1996, 27%. So here, again, we're about to see where the spike happened. By 2015, however, this figure had almost doubled to 47%. Now, how can a movement happen this fast? And I can tell you, it is pure brainwashing. So this is the graph that he is talking about. The serious problem. Do you think racial discrimination against blacks in this country is a very serious problem and somewhat serious problem, not too serious or not at all serious? And by the way, this is, again, all perpetuated by social media, legacy media, Hollywood, and whatever else. And it's not reflective of everyday life. So the red is white conservatives, the blue is white liberals. And by the way, the liberals are so racist. If you're a conservative and you are black or any other ethnic group, they will call you ethnic slurs. They will call you Uncle Toms. They will call you race traitors. They will call you all kinds of stuff. If you're gay or trans and you are conservative, they will make fun of you. They will call you names. There are people in these riots, cops who were black men, who were, being called the N-bomb. So, I don't want to hear it. These are racist. These leftists are racist. And I don't really know too many people who are conservative that are racist. I probably met some, but generally speaking, they're not out there in Klan rallies or anything like that. They They just want to stay segregated. I mean, and if you want to self-segregate, that's fine by me. I mean, it's a free country. Self-segregate if you want. What I don't want is segregation at the point of a gun, and the left is moving back toward that. So, perceived number of instances, of 0 to 6, in which blacks are regularly mistreated in the U.S. So here we have white liberals, little or no exposure, 78%, and then the red says some to high exposure, 22%. And white liberals, again, believe there's more, and then moderates, conservatives, it's lower. That's in the U.S., and then in the respondents' particular community, it changes slightly, but we can still see white liberals, it's higher. So in the point of all this is, and there's a little bit more I have to go, but the point of all this is this is mostly rich, elite white liberals that feel like they need to come to save the day of these poor minority groups who are just little children. They can't take care of themselves. I mean, they can't possibly do well, and they inundate that victim mentality into these people's minds, and then that puts a chip on their shoulder. And we're gonna look at some people that talk about that as well here within the next few days or next week. So this is a little bit further down in the article. It says white liberals, Israel, and Jewish political power. Now, before anyone accuses me of anti-Semitism or some other ridiculous thing, this is about truth, people. I don't really care what you think. I think, because I'm very secure in my beliefs and who I am. I know how I treat people, and frankly, again, if you think I think something different, you're just projecting some nonsense of your own upon me. This was written by a Jewish man. Let's keep that in mind. And I am merely reading his words, although I do happen to agree with much of what he says. Along with the sweeping changes on race and immigration issues is the reversal of white liberal attitudes towards Israel. In 1978 and 2014, white liberals consistently reported sympathizing more with Israel than Palestinians. Since March of 2016, this trend has turned on its face currently. Significantly more white liberals report greater sympathy for Palestinians than Israel. Here's another thing. I'm not anti-Muslim. I believe you can worship any god that you may believe in. But let's not pretend that Islam is the religion of peace. I am sorry, but Muhammad was a warlord. All right? That is the history. And people like to talk about Christianity. There was no war of Christians until about the 5th century, and most of that came out of Augustinianism and his belief that you could do that, and Christian nations coming down from the north and whatever else, and they had so many diverse beliefs that were basically Gnostic beliefs. They were not of first century Christian metaphysics, and I can prove that through their writings, which I may do one day here. And if you don't understand this, it's because you don't read and you don't think, and you just hear things. You just listen to, the expert professor that tells you stuff that isn't true, because he read it from some other expert, and you never looked at first sources and whatever else. I don't know what to tell you, man. I deal on straight facts and data. The sudden surging of white liberal attitudes towards Israel bears some resemblance to the rapid, attitudinal changes on racial issues. Like the police shooting of unarmed blacks during this period, Israel's 7-week bludgeoning of Gaza became arguably the most extensive of its military campaigns to be captured on social media. It was also the campaign that drew the least support from white liberals. Consider that 75% of white liberals felt that Israel's actions during the 2002 Operation Defensive Shield were justified, although this figure declined to 47% during Operation Cast Lead in 2009. It largely stayed there. It's 46% during Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012. But by the time Operation Protected Edge rolled around, less than 2 years later, the percent viewing Israel actions as justified dropped to a low 30%. So he goes on, anti-Zionism reached a high point in August of 2014, and so forth, while declining. Also observed white conservatives dropping from 78% and so forth. Read this for yourself, guys. I always say, don't take my word for it. Read it for yourself. But the point here is that the left has become anti-Jewish, and there are reasons for that. I'm going to touch on that briefly. There's some very interesting articles you can read from the New York Times back from the late 60s about how the black community hated the Jewish community because they were landlords and they didn't take care of their property. And some of that sentiment has rolled over today. But you won't hear a lot about that in the media because you're not allowed to disparage any sort of ethnic minority. And if you in any way paint any sort of light on an ethnic minority that points them to be, a bad person, aside from their skin tone, because apparently your the melanin in your skin determines your morality, at least according to them. Like you will see very little in the media covering this, and I'm going to prove this to you here in a bit at the end of all this. So this is please tell us your thoughts on whether people of the following groups have advantages or disadvantages, or neither advantage or disadvantage for getting ahead in the United States. So 1, largely advantage to some, largely disadvantage to some disadvantage, neither having advantage nor disadvantage is 3, 4, some advantage, and 5 is highly advantaged. So white men are the most advantaged perceived by white liberals, moderate liberals also, and conservatives as well. But the difference is striking. They're almost at a 5. They're a little over 4 with white liberals. And moderate liberals, they're just under a 4. And same with conservatives. But if you look at conservatives, as far as all the different groups, all the various groups over here, men, whites, Jews, Christians, Asians, women, African Americans, Hispanics, LGBT, Muslims, and immigrants. This is a really weird list, by the way. This is a poll from the Associated Press. Conservatives tend to see this rather equal. They see immigrants as having good advantage, which I would agree. Muslim as low advantage, and that's probably for a good reason. LGBT about the same. Hispanics, all that. They look at Christians as low advantage, and I can see that because what you hear in the news is white Christian males, heterosexuals, are the worst of the worst. I touched on that a little bit yesterday. And it's absolutely silly. It's absolutely insane. But anyways, I'm not going to hover on this too much. Again, look it up. Look it up. It's here on my screen now, but look it up. Look for yourself. This is a tablet article. I will come back to show you the title of it if you want to look at it. Nope, somehow I had 2 copies of that. No big deal. It says the political power of white liberals. Now, this is really interesting because, as I've explained, they've had all political power for a long time. Contact in public office, attend a political protest, march, or demonstration, work for candidate. These are different color correlations. Donate money to candidate campaign, attend local political meetings. So, whites, contact in public office, very high. 31%, donate money. Attend political protests, 20%. 17%, attend local political meetings. 9% work for candidate or campaign. Well, that's generally speaking normal. That's just among Democrats. And then we see the difference with blacks and Hispanics. The involvement's a lot lower. So white people of European descent, have more political involvement than those other groups. So as the meme goes of the right, these white liberal elites want to speak for the poor, disenfranchised people. I have a solution to this. How about you let those people in their community speak for themselves? See, that would actually be a representative democracy, a res publis, as we are supposed to have. Instead, we have a form of corporate fascism and oligarchy going on in our nation. And we have completely gotten away from the rule of law, which is the Constitution. That is the Constitution of the federal government and the Constitution of the states. But I digress. Let's get back here to the liberals. So we can see it's slightly higher here at 42 for white liberals, and then just Democrats. And again, the numbers are slightly higher across the board. Hispanics seem to have more representation a little bit than blacks in some areas, and vice versa, and Asians. So I don't know why I must have clicked on that again. Sorry, guys. So it says a wealth of research shows that elected officials are most responsive to the voices and campaign contributions they hear from the most. And by many measures, white liberals and Democrats are the most politically active group on their side of the partisan aisle, while white liberals make up 20 to 24% of the general population, but for a multitude of reasons exert an outsized political and cultural influence. You know why? Because they tend to congregate together. They don't like to hire people who are of different opinions. They're collectivist, and so once they get power and they're in these elite spheres, well, that and I personally I believe they lack many principles. It's why the Overton window is constantly shifting within the Democratic Party. It's why they're constantly, one minute they're saying, well, Donald Trump's a dictator, and then when he doesn't do enough to quell riots because it's not within his power amongst the federal system under the Constitution he can quash, don't get me wrong, insurrections, but when the state governors say, no, we'll handle it, or we don't want you here, then the media will say, well, he's not doing enough. We want him to be more, he needs to be more of an authoritarian. So you can't have it both ways, people. You have to be consistent with your principles. But most of these people don't have principles. They only care about power and emoting and pretending like they care about the poor. And they don't care about the poor. They just hate the rich or those who are more rich than they are. And I know they don't care about the poor because they don't donate to charity. And I didn't bring this up, but we can dive into that sometime. There are plenty of studies on this. People on the left, people who are more liberal, more leftist, not classically liberal, such as myself, they do not donate to charity. They expect the government to do that. That's called obfuscation. That means you're taking your personal responsibility and giving it to somebody else. You have a personal moral responsibility to take care of the poor, to take care of your neighbor, to take care of people around you, to take care of your family, to do things that are good for others. And allowing the government to do that for you, that makes you lazy, and it also makes you a slave. Anyways, it says they are more likely to consider themselves activists, are more active on social media, and significantly, they are one of the most affluent groups in the country. Of course, small groups of vocal, determined minorities can drive positive changes and spur social progress. The danger is that woke white activists acting on behalf of voiceless minorities have had their perceptions distorted by social media tinted caricatures that obscure more objective measures of reality and end up silencing or ignoring what the voiceless groups themselves have to say about what politicians are or what policies are in their best interest. Excuse me. And that's exactly what I just said. I remember reading an article a while back about a woman in Philadelphia who was talking about rich white liberals. Please don't speak for me. She was a black lady. So the point of all this is that these rich white liberals, these elitists, want to speak for these minority communities, and they have nothing in common with these people. And in fact, I showed you yesterday that liberals are more likely, or leftists, I need to quit using the word liberal because that's not an appropriate term, but these progressive leftists will talk down to people. AOC did it. You know, she plays up her minority stuff. And don't get me wrong, like, that woman's an airhead, but she plays down she plays up her minority stuff. But when she goes out and speaks to other groups, she went down to the South, she started going, y'all. And I might throw out a y'all now and again, but I'm also from the South. Now, I'm not from the deep South, but I am from the South, and I'm from an area that's kind of more rural, and there's some rednecks, and we say y'all around here. So, but I'm not trying to placate to anybody. I'm not trying to pander to anybody. I'm literally, that's just my accent. And if I go up north, some people think I have a southern drawl, and I don't, but, it happens. So the point, though, being is that studies have found this to be true. And this is these people actually looking their nose down at you and saying, well, you're too stupid. You don't know how to take care of yourself. And I know people like this. I have people like this in family. I've worked with people like this. I've talked with people out at bars or wherever like this. I've talked to people at political conventions who think like this. And I don't like this idea because no one knows what's best for you but you. And don't get me wrong, there is a small percentage of people, and I think it's largely based on IQ, but there is a small percentage of people, about 10% of the population, who just cannot take care of themselves because they cannot complete simple tasks. And I've also met a lot of those people because they've been in my care before when I was in corrections and in other jobs. Even when I was in the military, I had some very, very bad very, very non-intelligent Marines under my care. And I actually, because I was good with them, they used to give them to me. But I have a compassionate side that I try not to be too harsh with people. And so there are some people that need a little extra help. It's a much smaller percentage than you think, though. And most people are very happy to take care of themselves. But we have this system that has been built up over 100 years that has basically lulled most people to sleep into believing that the government must be their mommy and their daddy. And I'm sorry, that just makes you a child and in the end a slave. So before I get out of here, I just want to look at some headlines real quick. These are some New York Times articles, and I found this very interesting. So I had to archive this, but this is from the New York Times, and this is it safe to be Jewish in New York? So this was October 30th, 2018. So it says, just past midnight on May 1st, a young rabbinical student was walking home on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn when he was thought to be followed. A moment later, that intuition struck. Two men grabbed him and threw him against a car and punched him. The victim had dropped a box containing $200 meant for charity, but the money was untouched. The student, it seemed, was attacked because they overheard him speaking Hebrew on his cell phone. Now, they talk about the indictment here. I had to bring up this article. That is what they were indicted on assault charges and hate crimes. I had to bring up the separate article here, and this was covering it a little bit more in depth and has some videos. The interesting thing about this article, it gives the name of these men. So Darian Morgan and Justin George. It gives their age, but there's no mugshots and there's no description of them. Be sure that if this was a white individual, it would be there. Now there was another, here we go, article in which there again was the name. And I believe there's some video here. This is the actual footage. And I do want to just play this real quick, guys. Like, this is the police taking one of the suspects away. We don't need volume for this. And if you can see in that footage, that is not a white man. And I don't bring this up to disparage anybody. I'm just saying that this is how the media operates. They do not wish to tell you the truth. They don't want to make it clear what is actually going on. It says, no other American city is more associated with Jewish identity than New York, which is true, and, it goes on, and then it talks about here, the first inkling of this emerging several days ago of 2016 presidential election when swastikas and the phrase "Go Trump" showed up on playground equipment, in that area. But in fact, anti-Semitism was already quite on the rise for several years. Now, they want to try and pin this on white people. But here is the reality. This is according to the police department. To put that figure in the context, there have been four times as many crimes motivated by bias against Jews, 142 in all, as there have been against blacks. Hate crimes against Jews have outnumbered hate crimes targeted at transgender people by a factor of 20. Now think about what the media projects. It's always the LGBT people. If they don't get their transition, if these young children don't get this, then they're going to grow up being hated, which, by the way, there's story after story after story coming out now that where minors are wanting to switch back because they were confused, which we already knew from the science Maybe I'll get into that someday. All the hate facts. But this goes down a little bit more. It says, in one of them, according to the police prosecutors, a Muslim livery driver jumped out of a car and started beating up one of his victims, seemingly at random, yelling, Allah. Just this week, more swastikas appeared in advance of Halloween. Yeah, that's probably dumb kids, right? Like, does anybody, dumb kids just being stupid. But what we need to see here and understand is that Muslim jumped out of a car to attack a Jewish victim. What's the history there? So, I really don't think that there are any skinheads or actual Nazis in there. That's just fake hate crimes, which I'm going to get to in a minute, which are very, very prevalent. So it says the anti-Semitism biases consideration as a serious problem in New York, bypasses consideration as a serious problem in New York as it is to some extent because it refuses to conform to an easy narrative with a single ideological enemy. During the past 22 months, not one person caught or identified as the aggressor in an anti-Semitic crime has been associated with a far right-wing group. So the Mark Malinari, I believe is how you pronounce his name, some Italian name, I would assume, commanding officer of the police department hate crimes task force, told me, I almost wish it was sometimes more clear cut. It's every identity targeting every identity. No, it's not. I can tell you what it is. It's young black men and it's Muslims. That guy in that video over there was wearing a kufi. Now, if you don't know what that is the sort of Muslim equivalent of a yarmulke. So, and just to make it simple, right? And what they don't want to say here is, oh, it's not white people attacking Jews or Muslims or whatever else, or whatever the media has been telling you as white nationalism is on the rise because of Donald Trump. That is all bogus nonsense. So let's go here. New York Times. Hate crime hoax are rare, but can be devastating. So this again is trying to change the narrative, as New York Times is the trash that it is. This is February 2019. The Muslim college student was on the New York City subway when three men snatched her bag, reached for her hijab, and called her a terrorist. A Houston sixth grader was kidnapped and robbed by a band of young white supremacists. One with a "I hate black people" tattoo on his arm, and another, let's put this back on dark mode. Another one of the coldest nights of the year in Chicago. Jesse Smollett, a black gay actor, was attacked by two men who shouted "MAGA country" and slipped a noose around his necks. These three reported incidents, horrific assault, and the police as hate crimes, all built in American race, religion, and sexual identity fault lines. Except the police say all incidences never happened, and they did not happen. They were not real. This happens all the time. The media runs with this narrative. Anybody can paint a swastika anywhere or do something. There's a man, I believe, where was that? This is over a year ago, may have been in Georgia, who actually destroyed his own business and painted swastikas and called it a hate crime, vandalized it, looted it to get insurance money, and then was caught later on his own surveillance tape by the police because he didn't think it through. Guys, like seriously, I'm sorry, but if you think that white supremacy is on the rise from the right, you're an idiot. You're an absolute idiot. The only white supremacy that exists out there today is all on the left, and that's all it ever has existed. No one from the KKK became a Republican. I live in West Virginia in the former Senator Robert Byrd's district. He was a grand wizard in the KKK. He was a senator in this state until he died just several years back. Bill Clinton said at his funeral, well, he just had to be one of the, back in the day, people talk about him being a Klansman, but he was just one of them good old boys. That's just how you got in. You just had to be one of them good old boys. Okay, Billy boy. Okay. Like, wake up. Wake up to reality, people. Smell the coffee. Have some Folgers in your cup, please, because this stuff, I'm telling you, you are being brainwashed by left-wing media if you buy all those narratives out there. My friend and YouTuber Matt Christensen, who does several short episodes a week, usually two, I believe on Monday and Saturday, has a call-in show tonight on it's called Beauty and the Beta, and a Sunday night show that's about 2 hours long of news. Does hoax hate nearly every week, and often they will predict and guess. Very rarely are they wrong, and most of the time it has nothing to do with white supremacy. It has to do with insurance or something silly or someone wanting attention or whatever it is. Even Dave Chappelle made fun of Jussie Smollett, right? So this is NYP steps up patrols after reports of 8 anti-Semitic incidences. And this was in December of 2019. Now, I'm not going to read this article. I do want to remind you that Mayor de Blasio was allowing Muslims to gather and worship during this COVID crisis. And Jewish funerals and weddings were being stopped. Now, I'm not here to cheer for the Jewish people, but I believe that they have the right to worship in their communities just like the Christians do. But for some reason, because there's no expectation of violence, probably, they won't go after these groups. And they know that. They also know what's politically expedient. Interestingly, Muslims are far more conservative, but they know that if they align with the left, that they will be able to control the left. That's why you have people like Ilhan Omar, who obviously seems like, despite what she says her religion is quite a godless person. But you have people like her wanting to bring in Sharia law. You have people like Linda Sarsour, which apparently the DNC last night have tried to distance themselves from. DNC is a freaking mess right now. It's pretty insane. But I wanted to bring this up, these topics up, because, again, your personality and your political proclivities are tied together. And so I wanted to show you also that the groups, obviously your personality is going to dictate who you associate with. And I wanted to show you how this has changed over the years and how this has been amplified. And I'm going to continue to dive into this. We talked at the Hidden Tribes study yesterday. I called it Political Tribes. It's called Hidden Tribes. But it was right there on screen, so you guys could see that unless you're just listening. We're going to dive into that some more, maybe tomorrow, but I think I have some other topics to get into. Jonathan Haidt's Moral Foundations, I covered briefly, but I'm going to get more into that. We are going to probably delve more into personality psychology. We are going to delve into some history, but we are going to stay on this topic probably for a good 2 weeks. And the reason why is because you need to know the forces that you are fighting against if you are here fighting with me. So, with all that, I will be signing off here. This has been AllMinucOne. I'm Bill. Please, if you made it this far, like, share, and subscribe. Guys, if you want some more content from me, I do have a live show called The Ends Justify the Memes. Now, we were supposed to broadcast tonight, but my producer and co-host, he could not make it tonight because of other work obligations, unfortunately. So we may do a show tomorrow. I'm not sure. But normally, every Wednesday night at 7 p.m., we do The Ends Justify the Memes on DLive. That is 7 p.m. Eastern. You can look up Ends Justify Memes on DLive. We repost later to YouTube, so please go over there, like, share, and subscribe. We may try going live on YouTube at some point, but right now we just haven't, because our first cast got yanked immediately, and we said nothing extreme, but that is the tech censorship that we are up against. So again, please like, share, and subscribe, and you all be well.